The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow through the large glass windows of Washington, D.C.'s bustling international airport. The air buzzed with the usual morning chaos, announcements echoing through the terminals, suitcases rolling across tiled floors, and travelers rushing to their gates. Among them was Marcus Thompson, a man whose calm demeanor stood out amidst the hurried crowd. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, polished shoes clicking against the floor and carrying a sleek leather briefcase, Marcus looked every bit the professional he was. His dark skin seemed to radiate confidence, though his expression remained neutral, betraying no hint of emotion. Marcus had been traveling for work for years now, often shuttling between cities for meetings and conferences. Today's destination was Los Angeles, where he was scheduled to give an important presentation at a cybersecurity summit. As a senior defense analyst for the Pentagon, Marcus played a critical role in safeguarding national security. His expertise in identifying vulnerabilities in digital systems made him one of the most respected figures in his field. Yet, despite his accomplishments, there were moments when his presence alone seemed to provoke reactions that had nothing to do with his credentials. Over time, Marcus had learned to navigate these situations with grace, choosing not to let ignorance or prejudice affect him personally. After clearing security and grabbing a quick cup of coffee, Marcus made his way to Gate 23, where his flight was already boarding. He handed his ticket to the attendant, who scanned it with a polite smile before directing him toward the jet bridge. Stepping onto the plane, Marcus glanced down at his boarding pass again. It read, Seat 14A. Row 14 was located near the middle of the aircraft, offering neither the luxury of first class nor the cramped quarters of economy seating. It was functional, practical, and exactly what Marcus preferred. As he approached his seat, Marcus noticed the woman occupying the adjacent spot, 14B. She appeared to be in her late 40s or early 50s, dressed in designer clothing that screamed wealth but lacked warmth. Her blonde hair was styled impeccably and her makeup was flawless, yet something about her demeanor felt cold and distant. Her name tag, tucked into the corner of her carry-on bag, read, Patricia Langley. Without making direct eye contact, Patricia shifted slightly in her seat as if trying to create more space between herself and Marcus. He paid little attention to this, instead focusing on stowing his bag in the overhead compartment. Once settled, Marcus turned to greet his neighbor with a courteous nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and friendly. Patricia responded with a curt and avoided meeting his gaze altogether. Instead, she busied herself adjusting the strap of her purse and fiddling with the buttons on her coat. Her body language spoke volumes: crossed arms, stiff posture, and a pointed refusal to acknowledge his existence. To anyone watching, it would have been clear that Patricia was uncomfortable sharing her space with Marcus. Despite her obvious disapproval, Marcus chose not to dwell on it. He pulled out his laptop from his briefcase and opened a folder filled with documents related to his upcoming presentation. Cybersecurity wasn't just his job, it was his passion. Every report, every analysis represented countless hours of research and problem-solving aimed at protecting millions of people from unseen threats. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus immersed himself in his work, blocking out distractions around him. But Patricia couldn't seem to settle. She kept shifting in her seat, sighing audibly, and occasionally glancing sideways at Marcus. At one point, she muttered something under her breath, though Marcus couldn't quite catch the words. When the plane finally lifted off the ground, she leaned closer to the window as if trying to put physical distance between them. Marcus noticed her behavior but decided it wasn't worth addressing. After all, he reasoned, some people simply couldn't help themselves. Prejudice wasn't always loud or aggressive. It could manifest in subtle ways like avoiding conversation or feigning discomfort. For the next hour, the cabin hummed with the steady drone of engines and occasional bursts of chatter from other passengers. Marcus continued working, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad beside him. Outside, fluffy white clouds drifted past the windows, painting a serene picture that contrasted sharply with the tension brewing in row 14. Patricia, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated. Whether it was Marcus's quiet confidence or the mere fact of his presence, something about him clearly unsettled her. And unbeknownst to either of them, this simmering unease was about to boil over into something far more dramatic than either could have anticipated. As the flight cruised at 35,000 feet, the hum of the engines provided a steady backdrop to the unfolding drama in row 14. Marcus remained engrossed in his work, typing methodically on his laptop as he reviewed data for his upcoming presentation. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face, highlighting his focus and determination. To anyone watching, it was clear that Marcus wasn't just another passenger. He was someone with purpose, someone who carried the weight of responsibility. With quiet confidence, Patricia, however, couldn't shake her discomfort. Her earlier attempts to ignore Marcus had failed miserably, and now her agitation seemed to grow with each passing minute. She glanced around the cabin, perhaps hoping to find some form of distraction or reassurance from other passengers. But no one paid her much attention. Most were either dozing off, scrolling through their phones, or lost in conversation with seatmates. Frustrated and feeling increasingly isolated, Patricia began to fixate on Marcus's actions. At first, it was small things, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard, the occasional click of his mouse, even the way he adjusted his glasses while reading documents. To Patricia, these ordinary behaviors took on exaggerated significance. In her mind, every keystroke sounded louder than it actually was, every movement deliberate and calculated. Before long, she convinced herself that Marcus's behavior was somehow suspicious, though she couldn't articulate why. It didn't matter. Her unease had already taken root, feeding into her preconceived notions about people who didn't look like her. Finally, unable to contain herself any longer, Patricia leaned forward slightly and waved down a flight attendant. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise of the cabin. The attendant, a cheerful young woman named Emily, approached with a polite smile. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" she asked, glancing between Patricia and Marcus. Patricia hesitated for a moment, then gestured vaguely toward Marcus. "I'm sorry, but I need to say something. This man, he's making me uncomfortable." Her tone was clipped, almost accusatory, as if she expected immediate action. Emily furrowed her brow, clearly confused. "Can you tell me what's wrong?" she asked gently, trying to diffuse the tension. Patricia's response came quickly, though it lacked substance. "Well, for starters, he's been typing nonstop since we boarded. Doesn't that seem strange to you? And the way he keeps staring out the window, it's unsettling." She paused, searching for additional ammunition to bolster her case. "I just don't feel safe sitting next to him." Marcus, who had overheard the entire exchange, stopped typing and looked up. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Patricia quickly averted her gaze. There was no malice in Marcus's expression, only a mixture of disbelief and resignation. He closed his laptop slowly, placing it on the tray table in front of him. Then, without raising his voice, he addressed Patricia directly. "Ma'am, I assure you I'm not doing anything unusual. I'm simply preparing for a work meeting like many others on this flight." His words were calm and measured, but they did little to reassure Patricia. If anything, they only fueled her defensiveness. "That's easy for you to say," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "But how am I supposed to know that? You could be anyone." The commotion drew the attention of nearby passengers, who began whispering among themselves. Some exchanged sympathetic looks with Marcus while others watched curiously to see how the situation would unfold. Emily, caught in the middle, tried to mediate. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but Mr. Thompson hasn't done anything inappropriate. Would you like me to bring you a glass of water or help you relocate to another seat?" Patricia shook her head vehemently. "No, that's not the point. The point is he shouldn't be here." Her voice carried an edge of entitlement, as if she believed her discomfort warranted drastic measures. When Emily pressed further, asking for specific examples of misconduct, Patricia grew flustered. "It's just the way he's acting. It's aggressive, intimidating. I shouldn't have to explain myself." By now, several passengers had turned in their seats to watch the confrontation. One older gentleman leaned over and muttered to his wife, This is ridiculous. The guy's just minding his own business. A young woman seated across the aisle nodded in agreement, rolling her eyes at Patricia's theatrics. Despite the growing murmurs of disapproval, Patricia refused to back down. She insisted that Marcus posed a threat, even though she couldn't provide concrete evidence to support her claims. Eventually, Emily called the lead flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Sarah, to handle the escalating situation. After listening carefully to both sides, Sarah decided to consult with the captain via the intercom system. Though reluctant to escalate matters further, the crew felt obligated to address Patricia's complaints, especially given her repeated demands for intervention. When the plane touched down at the layover stop in Dallas, the captain made an announcement over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay, but due to circumstances beyond our control, we'll need to escort one passenger off the aircraft before continuing to Los Angeles." Gasps rippled through the cabin as security personnel entered and approached Marcus's seat. For his part, Marcus remained composed throughout the ordeal. He gathered his belongings quietly, avoiding eye contact with Patricia, whose smug expression suggested she viewed this as a victory. As he stood up and followed the security officers toward the exit, several passengers offered words of encouragement. "Sorry this happened to you," one man said sincerely. Another woman patted his arm and whispered, "You handled that with so much class." Once off the plane, Marcus stepped onto the jet bridge, where he exhaled deeply and allowed himself a moment of reflection. Though he knew he hadn't done anything wrong, the injustice of the situation stung. Still, he reminded himself that anger wouldn't solve anything. What mattered most was finding a way to move forward and ensuring that moments like this didn't define him. Back on the plane, Patricia initially basked in the aftermath of her complaint, believing she had rid herself of the source of her discomfort. But as the reality of what she'd done sank in, cracks began to form in her self-righteous facade. Fellow passengers stared at her with thinly veiled disdain, and whispers filled the air. Someone snapped a photo of her scowling face, capturing the disdain that had sparked outrage far beyond the confines of the airplane. Little did Patricia realize, her actions had set off a chain reaction that would soon spiral out of her control. Once Marcus stepped off the plane in Dallas, he found himself standing in the brightly lit jet bridge, his thoughts swirling with a mix of frustration and disbelief. He had been removed from a flight, not because he had done anything wrong, but because someone else had decided his mere presence was unacceptable. The absurdity of it all weighed heavily on him. Yet Marcus knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and pulled out his phone to call his superior at the Pentagon. The call connected quickly, and Marcus explained the situation as calmly as possible. On the other end of the line was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a no-nonsense woman who had mentored Marcus early in his career and now served as one of his closest allies within the Department of Defense. Evelyn listened intently, her voice steady but tinged with anger when she spoke. "Marcus, this is unacceptable. Let me handle it." Her tone left no room for doubt. She would not let this incident slide unnoticed. Within minutes, Evelyn sprang into action. She contacted high-ranking officials within the Pentagon, including individuals who could reach out directly to the airline's corporate office. By the time Marcus hung up, word of the incident was already spreading like wildfire through government channels. It wasn't just about Marcus being kicked off a plane. It was about the broader implications of racial bias and how such actions undermine trust in institutions meant to serve everyone equally. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Patricia Langley sat stiffly in her seat, clutching her purse like a lifeline. At first, she felt triumphant, convinced she had made the right decision by having Marcus removed. But as the reality of what she'd done began to sink in, cracks started forming in her self-assured demeanor. A middle-aged man seated across the aisle leaned over and said, "You know, that guy you got kicked off? He works for the Pentagon. I heard him talking to the flight attendant." Patricia froze, her face draining of color. "What?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded knowingly, adding, Yeah, something about cybersecurity. Pretty important stuff, if you ask me. Patricia's mind raced. She hadn't considered that Marcus might hold a position of authority, let alone one tied to national security. Suddenly, her complaints about him typing on his laptop or looking out the window seemed laughably trivial and dangerously misguided as the plane prepared for takeoff once again. Patricia became acutely aware of the stares directed her way. Some passengers glared openly, while others whispered behind cupped hands. One young woman sitting nearby snapped a photo of Patricia without her noticing, capturing her scowling expression mid-conversation with another passenger. That photo would later go viral, turning Patricia into an unwitting symbol of prejudice and ignorance. Outside the plane, Marcus waited patiently in the terminal, observing the chaos unfolding online. News outlets had picked up the story after a fellow passenger tweeted about the incident, attaching screenshots of Patricia's behavior alongside photos of Marcus exiting the aircraft. The tweet exploded almost instantly, garnering thousands of likes, retweets, and comments. Hashtags like Connor Stand with Marcus and Accountability in Action began trending nationwide, drawing attention from journalists, activists, and even politicians. Reporters descended upon the airport, eager to get statements from both Marcus and Patricia. However, Marcus declined interviews, preferring to let the facts speak for themselves. His silence only added to the intrigue surrounding the case, prompting speculation about his background and role at the Pentagon. Meanwhile, Patricia's name surfaced online thanks to eyewitness accounts and the viral photo. Comment sections filled with outrage as people condemned her actions, dissecting every detail of the confrontation. Back in Washington, D.C., senior officials at the Pentagon issued a formal statement condemning the treatment Marcus had endured. They emphasized the importance of respecting all individuals, regardless of race, and vowed to support Marcus fully. The airline also released a statement apologizing for the incident and promising to review its policies regarding discrimination complaints. However, public sentiment remained firmly against them, with many calling for accountability beyond empty words. For Patricia, the fallout was swift and brutal. Her employer, a prominent lobbying firm specializing in corporate interests, received hundreds of calls demanding answers. Employees staged an impromptu meeting to discuss the scandal, leaving Patricia isolated and humiliated. When reporters arrived at her office building seeking comment, she retreated to her car, visibly shaken. Social media users dug deeper into her background, uncovering past controversies involving insensitive remarks she had allegedly made during networking events. Each revelation only fueled the firestorm surrounding her. That evening, as Marcus boarded a new flight arranged by the airline, he reflected on everything that had transpired. Though part of him wanted justice, another part recognized that this moment presented an opportunity to shed light on systemic issues and inspire meaningful change. As the plane soared into the night sky, Marcus stared out the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness below. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Countless voices had risen in solidarity, proving that even in moments of injustice there was strength in unity. Unbeknownst to Marcus, however, the story was far from over. Patricia's actions had ignited a national conversation about racism and privilege, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their society. For better or worse, the ripple effects of that single flight would continue to spread, shaping lives and perspectives long after the headlines faded. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of activity, both for Marcus and for Patricia. While Marcus was determined to move forward with his life and career, Patricia found herself grappling with the consequences of her actions. The story had exploded across news outlets, social media platforms, and even late-night talk shows, transforming what began as a personal confrontation into a national debate about racial bias and accountability. For Marcus, the immediate aftermath was a mix of support and scrutiny. Reporters camped outside his home in Washington, D.C., hoping to catch a glimpse of him leaving or returning. Calls poured in from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike, all offering words of encouragement or expressing outrage on his behalf. Some reached out to commend his composure during the ordeal, while others shared their own experiences of discrimination, thanking him for shining a light on an issue that affected so many. Though Marcus appreciated the outpouring of solidarity, he chose to keep a low profile, focusing instead on delivering his presentation in Los Angeles, a task he viewed as more important than ever. When Marcus finally took the stage at the Cybersecurity Summit, the audience gave him a standing ovation before he even began speaking. The applause wasn't just for his expertise. It was a show of respect for how he had handled himself in the face of adversity. As he stood behind the podium, adjusting the microphone to his height, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Thank you," he said simply, waiting for the clapping to subside. Then, he launched into his presentation, diving deep into the complexities of digital security threats facing the nation. But halfway through his speech, Marcus paused. He looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, most not, and decided to address the elephant in the room. "Before I continue," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that's been weighing heavily on my mind. What happened to me on that flight wasn't just about me. It was about the countless individuals who face similar challenges every single day. People whose voices often go unheard because they don't have a platform or a title to protect them." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Marcus went on to explain how moments like these could serve as catalysts for change, if people were willing to listen and learn. He urged his audience to confront their biases, challenge stereotypes, and advocate for fairness in all aspects of life. When he finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause once again, this time tinged with admiration and resolve. Many attendees approached him afterward, pledging to use their influence to combat racism and promote equality. While Marcus inspired others with his grace and determination, Patricia faced a very different reality. Her name had become synonymous with ignorance and entitlement, thanks in large part to the viral photo and tweets that painted her as the villain of the story. Reporters swarmed her suburban neighborhood, snapping pictures of her house and ambushing her whenever she stepped outside. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, some distancing themselves from her entirely. Even her closest friends struggled to defend her, unsure of what to say in the face of such overwhelming public backlash. At work, things weren't much better. Employees at Patricia's lobbying firm staged protests, demanding that she be fired for tarnishing the company's reputation. Clients threatened to pull contracts unless action was taken, and senior executives held emergency meetings to discuss damage control. In the end, Patricia had no choice but to resign. Her departure was announced via a brief email sent to staff, citing personal reasons as the cause. But everyone knew the truth. Stripped of her job, her privacy, and her sense of normalcy, Patricia retreated from public life. She stopped answering calls, avoided social media, and spent most of her time indoors away from prying eyes. Friends described her as a shadow of her former self, withdrawn, anxious, and deeply ashamed. Eventually, she released a written statement, apologizing for her behavior, though many dismissed it as insincere given the timing and lack of specificity. "I never intended to hurt anyone," the statement read. "I am truly sorry for any pain I may have caused." Despite her apology, the damage was done. Patricia's actions had ignited a firestorm of criticism, sparking discussions about privilege, accountability, and systemic racism. Activists seized the opportunity to highlight the ways in which prejudice manifests in everyday situations, urging businesses and institutions to implement policies aimed at fostering inclusivity. The airline involved in the incident faced intense pressure to reform its procedures regarding discriminatory complaints. In response, executives announced plans to introduce mandatory sensitivity training for all employees and establish a hotline for passengers to report incidents of bias. As the weeks passed, the story continued to dominate headlines, inspiring op-eds, panel discussions, and even documentaries exploring the intersection of race, power, and privilege. Schools incorporated the case into lesson plans, using it as a teachable moment to educate students about empathy and respect. Meanwhile, advocacy groups rallied around Marcus, inviting him to speak at conferences and community events. Though he initially hesitated to embrace the role of spokesperson, Marcus eventually realized the importance of leveraging his platform to drive positive change. One of the most impactful initiatives born out of the incident was a partnership between Marcus and a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating racial bias. Together, they developed a series of workshops designed to help businesses identify and address discriminatory practices. Participants learned how to recognize microaggressions, navigate difficult conversations, and create environments where everyone felt valued and respected. The program quickly gained traction, earning praise from corporate leaders and grassroots activists alike. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, refusing to let anger or bitterness consume him. He understood that true progress required patience and perseverance, qualities he had honed over years of navigating challenges both professional and personal. For Patricia, however, redemption proved elusive. Though she attempted to rebuild her life in quiet obscurity, the scars of her actions lingered, serving as a constant reminder of the harm caused by unchecked prejudice. As the dust settled, one thing became clear. The incident on that fateful flight had transcended its origins, becoming a symbol of broader societal issues. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their communities, challenging them to do better, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or misunderstood. And though the journey toward justice and understanding was far from over, the seeds of change had been planted, ready to grow into something meaningful and lasting. In the months that followed the incident, the ripple effects continued to spread, touching lives in ways both expected and unforeseen. Marcus Thompson emerged as a quiet but powerful advocate for change, using his experience not as a personal vendetta but as a stepping stone toward broader societal progress. His story resonated with people from all walks of life, inspiring conversations about bias, empathy, and accountability that transcended borders and industries. One of the most remarkable outcomes of the ordeal was the widespread recognition Marcus received, not just for his professional achievements, but for his character. Colleagues at the Pentagon began referring to him as the man who turned adversity into action, a nickname that stuck despite his modesty. He was invited to speak at prestigious forums, including universities, tech conferences, and even Capitol Hill, where lawmakers sought his insights on addressing systemic racism within institutions. Though Marcus initially felt uneasy about being thrust into the spotlight, he soon realized the importance of sharing his story. Each time he recounted the events of that fateful flight, he framed them not as an attack on Patricia Langley, but as a call to action for everyone listening. His speeches often included anecdotes from his childhood, growing up in a small town, where opportunities for young black men were limited. He spoke candidly about the microaggressions he encountered throughout his education and career, emphasizing how those moments shaped his resilience and determination. But rather than dwell on negativity, Marcus focused on solutions, ways individuals and organizations could dismantle barriers and foster inclusivity. His message was clear: progress required effort, humility, and a willingness to listen. The workshops Marcus helped develop became one of the cornerstones of this movement. Businesses across the country adopted the program, integrating it into employee training sessions and leadership seminars. Participants learned practical strategies for identifying unconscious bias, managing difficult conversations, and creating environments where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. Feedback from attendees was overwhelmingly positive, with many describing the workshops as transformative. One participant wrote in a review, "I thought I understood what discrimination looked like until I went through this program. It opened my eyes in ways I never expected." Meanwhile, Patricia Langley faded further into obscurity, though her actions left an indelible mark on public consciousness. Her name remained a cautionary tale, cited in articles and discussions about privilege and prejudice. Some argued that she had been unfairly vilified, pointing out that her behavior stemmed from ignorance rather than malice. Others countered that intent mattered less than impact, that her actions had real consequences for Marcus and countless others who saw themselves reflected in his story. Despite the backlash, There were glimmers of hope for Patricia. After months of isolation, she began attending therapy sessions, encouraged by friends who believed she deserved a chance to grow. Her therapist worked with her to unpack the roots of her biases, challenging her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Slowly but surely, Patricia started to see the world through a different lens. She volunteered at local community centers, interacting with people from diverse backgrounds and learning firsthand about their struggles and triumphs. While she knew she could never undo the harm she had caused, she hoped her efforts might serve as a form of redemption. For Marcus, closure came not in the form of revenge or retribution, but in the knowledge that his experience had sparked meaningful change. He received letters from strangers thanking him for giving them the courage to speak up against injustice. Teachers shared stories of students organizing anti-racism campaigns inspired by his example. Even the airline involved in the incident reached out personally to apologize, inviting Marcus to participate in shaping its new policies around discrimination complaints. The gesture, though symbolic, meant a great deal to him. It signaled a shift toward greater accountability and understanding. As the year drew to a close, Marcus decided to take a step back from the public eye. He declined several high-profile speaking engagements, choosing instead to focus on his work at the Pentagon and spend more time with his family. On weekends, he could often be found coaching his nephew's soccer team or mentoring young professionals eager to follow in his footsteps. His influence extended far beyond headlines and hashtags. It lived on in the lives he touched and the values he instilled in others. The legacy of the incident also manifested in tangible ways. Advocacy groups reported a surge in donations and volunteers, enabling them to expand their reach and impact. Schools incorporated lessons on racial equity into their curriculums, ensuring that future generations would grow up equipped to challenge prejudice. Corporations implemented diversity initiatives, holding themselves accountable for fostering inclusive workplaces. These changes didn't happen overnight, but they represented significant strides toward a more equitable society. Looking back, Marcus sometimes marveled at how one seemingly ordinary day had transformed into something extraordinary. He hadn't asked for any of it, the attention, the accolades, the responsibility, but he embraced it nonetheless, knowing that his voice mattered. And while he couldn't erase the pain of that flight, he could channel it into something constructive, something that would outlast him. In the end, the story wasn't just about Marcus or Patricia. It was about humanity itself. It was a reminder that we are all capable of growth, of learning, of doing better. It challenged us to look inward and ask difficult questions. How do our actions affect others? What can we do to create a world where everyone feels safe and valued? The answers weren't always easy, but the journey toward finding them was worth every step. As Marcus boarded another plane months later, bound for yet another conference, he noticed something different in the air. Passengers greeted one another warmly, regardless of race or background. Flight attendants wore pins bearing messages of unity and inclusion. Even the captain's pre-flight announcement included a brief note about treating fellow travelers with kindness and respect. Small gestures, perhaps, but ones that signaled a shift, a collective commitment to building bridges rather than walls. Marcus smiled to himself, settling into his seat. He opened his laptop once again, ready to tackle the challenges ahead. Outside the window, the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden light across the sky. It was a new day, full of promise and possibility, a testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and hope.